Welcome back to the Vintage New Jersey podcast. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating what if questions in the tri state area. What if Staten Island wasn't a part of New York City? And what if the so called forgotten borough actually belonged to this great state of New Jersey? It may sound like a joke to you that you would hear at a bar in Bayonne or a diner in Perth Amboy, but the truth is, this idea has been floating around for hundreds of years. And strangely enough, the reason Staten Island became a part of New York in the first place may have come down to something incredibly simple: a 17th century boat race. That's right. The fate of an entire island may have been decided by one who could sail around the island the fastest. Over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack the geography, the colonial politics, the strange race that supposedly settled the border, and why, even today, some people still argue that Staten Island makes more sense as a part of the Garden State than New York City. Let's check it out. So let's start with a map. Staten Island sits at the very southwestern edge of New York City, and it's separated from Brooklyn by the Narrows, but it's physically much closer to New Jersey than it is to New York. In fact, the island is connected to New Jersey by three major bridges: the Bayonne Bridge, the Goethals Bridge, and the Outer Bridge Crossing. All three of these bridges lead directly into towns like Bayonne, Elizabeth, and Perth Amboy. Meanwhile, there's only one road connection to the rest of New York City, the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, which connects to Brooklyn. And if you ever driven over any of those bridges, really, but that specific bridge over, during rush hour, it can feel like hell on earth. There's always construction and stuff going on, traffic, whatever, you name it. But geographically, Staten Island almost looks like it belongs to New Jersey anyway. Historically, it actually once did. To understand why, we need to go back to the 1600s. So yes, that that far back. At the time, the region wasn't New York or New Jersey. It was just a patchwork of European colonies. So just this big swath of land. The Dutch controlled most of the Hudson River area as a part of New Netherland. That's what it was called. While the English were expanding their influence all along the Atlantic coast. So, like, the South, South Carolina, North Carolina, even Boston, all that. In 1664, the English seized New Netherlands and handed control of the territory to James, Duke of York, who was the brother of the King, Charles. The Duke of York suddenly owned a massive stretch of land that would eventually become New York and New Jersey. But there was a problem. The borders were not clearly defined. Soon after receiving the territory, the Duke granted a part of the land to two of his allies, Sir George Carteret and Lord John Berkeley, who established the colony of New Jersey. So, one of the 13 original colonies. And that's when the arguments begin. Because when you look at the map, like I was saying earlier, Staten Island sits west of the Hudson River line, that same line that separates New York from New Jersey. Um, so, yeah, by that logic, the island should have belonged to New Jersey. I mean, look at the map, guys. I mean, it's crazy. But the Duke of York wanted it all. So the story goes that the dispute was settled in a very unusual way, maybe not unusual for the time, but the legend says that the Duke proposed a challenge. Whoever could sail around Staten Island the fastest would determine who would have ultimate control over it. So if New Jersey's representatives won the race, the island would belong to New Jersey. If New York won the race, then it would remain under the Duke of York's control. Now, historians debate whether the race was official or more of just like a colorful local legend. But according to the story, the race happened sometime in the late 1600s. Two ships set off to race around the island. New Jersey's vessel reportedly took the safer route, hugging the shoreline, the coastline all the way around. But New York's captain did something pretty risky. He cut across the treacherous waters near the Narrows, using the tides to gain speed. So by taking that gamble, he completed that loop around the island first. So he beat New Jersey's vessel, and with that, Staten Island stayed with New York. So pretty much a race decided a border. At least how that's how the story's been told to everyone throughout the years. So if you fast forward some centuries, today Staten Island is one of the five boroughs of New York City. But culturally, it often feels like it feels very different than New York City. Unlike Manhattan or Brooklyn, Staten Island is largely suburban. It has winding residential streets, it has detached houses, parks, and just overall quiet neighborhoods. There's also no subway system to speak of. There is no skyline of skyscrapers there as well. So in many ways, it feels like a suburban New Jersey town rather than a dense urban landscape of New York. So for decades, residents have complained about being overlooked by City Hall. Um, so that's why they got the nickname the Forgotten Borough, and it dates back to at least the mid 20th century. Many Staten Islanders feel like they were paying New York City taxes while receiving fewer services and less attention. And we just had that snowstorm a couple months back, and it was the same type of deal. In the 90s, Staten Island residents held a non-binding referendum whether the borough should secede from New York City, and the results were pretty shocking. About 65% voted in favor for independence. They wanted their own city government completely separate from New York City and the boroughs, the rest of the boroughs. But the plan required approval from the New York State legislature, and the approval never came. The idea stalled, and the frustration never fully disappeared, which brings us to a different possibility. Instead of becoming an independent city, what if Staten Island actually joined forces with beautiful New Jersey? It may sound far-fetched, but the idea pops up every once in a while. Some politicians in New Jersey have even suggested studying that possibility. In recent years, a handful of state lawmakers jokingly, or maybe seriously, floated the idea of forming a committee to examine this annexation. Their argument was that Staten Island already functions like a New Jersey suburb. Many residents already commute to New Jersey from those three bridges I mentioned earlier. Their daily economic and cultural connections often point west and not north. And realistically, changing the state borders is incredibly difficult. It would require a lot of things: the New York State Legislature, the New Jersey State Legislature, I'm not saying that word correctly, but you know what I mean, Congress, and votes. New York would almost certainly fight to keep that territory, but the idea persists because Staten Island sits in such a strange geographical and political position. It's a part of New York City, and yet it feels so completely different from it. So every so often someone looks at the map and asks that same question that people have asked for centuries, myself included. That's why I started this podcast. Why isn't Staten Island a part of New Jersey? And what if New Jersey actually won that sailing race? Maybe Staten Island would be a New Jersey county. Maybe its political voice would feel stronger. Maybe nothing would be different at all. um, but there is, one thing for certain is that borders often look permanent on maps, yet so many of them were shaped by strange decisions, old deals, and sometimes even a race around an island. And in this case, that race may have helped decide the fate of 1.5 million acres of harbor, history, and identity in the heart of the tri-state region. So next time you drive across any of those three bridges, Bayonne, or even take the Staten Island Ferry, remember you might just be passing through a place that should have been New Jersey. Thank you for listening. Sorry, I mispronounced some words. I swear I know how to say them. It's a lot. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a New Yorker or a New Jersey native, and ask them this same question. Should Staten Island stay with New York, or should they be a part of this beautiful Garden State? Thanks for listening.
Message New Jersey podcast.